Kul Tzadik Tzadik Shalosh Me'as Chasar Lamo Shenema Ramkul Vayesh Posesema Malay Omer Shemen Chalapto Lamotza Kadosh Baruch Hu Kli Machzik Rochel Yisrael El HaShalom Shenemar Adonai Ozem Oyitain Adonai Varech Es Amov HaShalom Hadron Lach Meseches Uksum Hadron Chalon Title Lach Meseches Uksum Title Chalon L'Slash Minach Meseches Uksum L'Slash Minon Lo Alma Dem Lo Alma Osi Hadron Lach Meseches Uksum Hadron Chalon Title Lach Meseches Uksum Title Chalon L'Slash Minach Meseches Uksum L'Slash Minon Lo Alma Dem Lo Alma Osi Hadron Lach Meseches Uksum Hadron Chalon Title Lach Meseches Uksum Title Chalon L'Slash Minach Meseches Uksum L'Slash Minon Lo Alma Dem Lo Alma Osi So Benach Adon Hene B'Lev Sen Shteis Taroschom Asein B'Lam Aser So Yimona Lo Mahalba Chani bar Papa, Ram bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Ach bar Papa, Abba Maariv bar Papa, Rachman bar Papa, Yichbach bar Papa, Surch bar Papa, Adar bar Papa, Dar bar Papa. Harab Nadrul Hen is Terps of Chabal Kvinum, Bios of Mechabe Yisrael, and Nachtu, Tzedzeim 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 Mechabe Yisrael, Yodi Shmecha, Glomdei Sarsecha Lishma, Bavari Tzedzeim Tzedzeim Yilam Yili, Yibilim Yisabim Chukecha, Luman Loi Vosh. Vom Loi Chtach Kudech, Yivam Chisone, Baruch Atah Adonai Lam Deni Chukecha, Amen, 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 Selva Ed. Vodim Nachloch, so von nach Adon Hen B'Lev Sen, Samach Kenim Yoshre Beis HaMedrash, Lo Samach Kenim Yoshre Kronos. Shon mashkim behem mashkim, ana mashkim very slow, behem mashkim very betailem. Adam melem behem melem, adam melem kam schar, behem levenem kam schar. Adam rotzim behem rotzim, ana rotzim chayol haba. Behem rotzim leve shachas. Shenemar batar lehem tordem leve shachas, asher demim mal lo yachzu mehem ani yaftach ba. Yosef nacha Adonai Hai, Shem shel Satan el Sayim sechas uksen kein tazrin askem sechas svar machrel Simon mod lamed lishmol lasul khamis kovis sacha biava. Schuzkol Tanaim Mamorim Sabina Chacham Yamadli Ulazish Lo Samush Otaran Pim Piazim Zarazariam Adalam Skam Bib Sachalcha Tanchelscha Shabchad Shmuel Lecha Makitos His Checha Kibim Boyumecha V'Sib Lechosh Noschaim Arachim Mimna Yismullah O Shabchabad Adonai Os Moitain Adonai Rechamo Vashalom. Iskadav Shmei Rabbi Bimadi Yos Iskadat Olach Yosel Messiah Lasach Yosel Nachay Almol Bib No Kartu Yishlei Shachul Hechel B'Gava Meka Pulchana B'Chromin Ara Lasava B'Chad and Ishmael Asher Gav Kucher Brichel Machus Evi Kari Sach Tenukar Mashiach B'Chay Chol Mechad Mechad Chol Beis Yisrael Bagalas Man Karib Imru Amen Yehei Shmei Rabbi Mavarach Amamei Almaya Yisbarach V'Shabab Yisbar V'Sram Yisasei Sadar V'Salev Yisalash V'Kutsha Brichel Le'ei Lo Min Kabach Chasav Shir Asad V'Shasav V'Nech Masad V'Rambam Avin Ru Amen Ay Yisrael V'Rabonam V'Tamid Ham Kol Tamanei Samadei Han V'Kam Noskim Reiss V'Asor Dein V'Chol Asar V'Asar Yehon Nechol Shalom Rabbi Kinim Chizrach V'Chayin V'Richim Zolim V'Vichei V'Kolim V'Kodom V'Shmai V'Ara V'Imru Amen Yesham Rabbi Shmai V'Chaim Tovim Lein V'Kor Yisrael V'Imru Amen Yisesham Ramav Hubrachov Yisesham Aleinu V'Kor Yisrael V'Imru Amen
Amen.
Amen.
At this time, we're waiting Rabbi Reichman to be on the phone, so at this time we'll have Rabbi Reiss from the CRC and from YU speak about trash.
Okay. I'll do my best to stall.
It's Mr. Bishus of the Zavsky and of Soloveichik and other distinguished Rabbanim. And a special acknowledgement towards Rabbi Eli Lazavsky, Rabbi Sion, Rabbi Levi Mislavsky, who together with Rabbi Heshi Reichman and one or two others served as special Malachei Rachamim, really angels of mercy, to expand the quality and to extend the quantity of Rabbi Josh Hoffman's final years through their chesed, their dedication, their tremendous ava. There was a certain sweetness to Rabbi Josh Hoffman. It was a sweetness born of a rare combination of outstanding Torah scholarship with extraordinary humility. One proof of a gadol is someone who is a Talmid Chacham who carries himself with a kol demama daka, emulating the softness and the sweetness of the divine presence. when Rabbi Josh Hoffman, also known as the Hopper, passed away approximately a month ago, I believe in his early 70s, he still possessed the same soft, sweet voice and quality that distinguished him at the age of 35. His neshama transcended his guf. Indeed, as Rabbi Hoffman's guf weakened and waned over the years due to complications from diabetes and multiple amputations of his limbs, preparations were even made at one point for his levaya, because there appeared to be nothing left of him. But some people in this world are able to live as a neshama even without a guf. And towards the very end of his life, the Hopper was such a person. Even after his premature levaya had been scheduled, he recovered long enough to continue to pen Divrei Torah and transmit the Divrei Elokim Chayim that embodied his essence. Rabbi Hoffman, of course, was a loyal Talmud of his revered Rabbi, Rav Soloveichik Tzatzal, in both the technical sense and also in the more profound sense. He was loyal, like Yehoshua ben Nun, his namesake, in both figuratively, maybe actually, arranging the benches in the Beis Medrash, being a faithful attendant to his Rebbe, but also in the sense of lo yamish mitoch ha'oel, of absorbing all of his Rebbe's words and opinions and perspectives, and living his life in accordance with the ideals that Rav Aaron espoused. I remember once after I delivered a shiur at YU about the Torah's attitude towards how to relate to non-Jews, in which I spoke about the importance of not using terms that sounded pejorative or derogatory. Rabbi Hoffman came over to me afterwards to reinforce my words by citing Rav Aaron as being fiercely opposed to any such appellations, even the kind that others might have tolerated as mere Yiddishisms. Rav Hoffman epitomized not only Rav Aaron's logic of the mind, but also his logic of the heart. And like his namesake, he was always a nar, always youthful in spirit and forever a Talmud. There was a New York Times article about Rav Soloveichik in 1987 that described his unflappable persistence in teaching Torah despite his physical frailty and impairment following a serious stroke. Rabbi Hoffman was quoted in that New York Times article as saying, "His courage and determination to teach the Torah cannot be stopped." The same epithet can be said today about Rabbi Hoffman himself, especially during his final years when his body parts were being buried while his neshama marched on. There was a time when the Hopper's physical body had been prodigious, but remarkably, he never seemed to take up any space. He was a ubiquitous presence around Yeshiva University, Yeshivat Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan, often attending the public shiurim that took place around the campus, but somehow, despite his great stature, he always conveyed the impression of not really being there, or at least not really mattering. His presence immeasurably added to every shiur and every occasion, but he always made himself seem as if he were merely incidental or ornamental. The last couple of years, I would make a point of going over to Rabbi Hoffman when I would see him in the Beis Medrash. I travel to Yeshiva once a month to give shiurim. I would see him in the Beis Medrash or on the streets around Amsterdam Avenue, and I'd be zoche to just be able to spend a few minutes with him at YU. Although, in terms of his physique, he almost seemed invisible, he would invariably perk up whenever I would initiate a conversation, and I was enormously inspired by his never-wavering smile and his positive attitude up until the very end. He would always ask me how things were going in Chicago, and he would share with me his tremendous affection for his friends in this city. Rabbi Hoffman occupied a special status at Yeshiva as the longest-standing Kollel fellow. In my years as the Menahel at Yeshiva Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan, I remember we had several different categories of Kollel fellows. We had the Kat Smicha Kollel fellows, we had the Kollel Elyon fellows, we had the Yodin fellows, and then we had Rabbi Joshua Hoffman. He defied easy description or characterization. He was part of the neshama of the yeshiva. His very presence breathed the spiritual beauty and holiness into the Beis Medrash. Now, a true neshama has a sense of humor, and the Hopper had an unshakable sense of humor about the human condition, including his own, even in times of enormous hardship. His sense of humor was part of his divine spark, never ever at anyone else's expense, and always for the purpose of making his Torah messages as palatable and as pleasant as possible. The Hopper, to the best of my knowledge, never married. Like Ben Azai, he was nafsho choshka b'Torah. Parshas Bamidbar speaks of Ve'ela toldos Aaron and Moshe, but only recounts the names of Aaron's children. Rashi points out this fact and notes, quoting the Gemara in Sanhedrin, V'nikra toldos Moshe, it's called toldos Moshe, even though we only speak about the sons of Aaron, lefi shalom don Torah, because Moshe taught the children of Aaron Torah. Malamed shkola malamed ben chavero Torah male elav akasav kilu yoldo. This teaches us that if you teach Torah to somebody else's children, it's considered as if they're also your children. Rabbi Hoffman, through a steady stream of Divrei Torah, which he published on a weekly basis, served as a father figure for countless individuals who were inspired by his Torah, by the soft sweetness of his delivery, and the gentle nobility of his character. I would like to conclude by sharing an insight from Rabbi Hoffman himself on this past week's Parshas HaShavua. He entitled this piece, quite fittingly, Down to Earth. He wrote about the juxtaposition of Parshas Nazir and the Birkas Kohanim, as well as the connection between Parshas Naso and Chag HaShavuos, that in most years is read, Parshas Naso, right after the celebration of Chag HaShavuot. Rabbi Hoffman quoted the Eish Kodesh, Rabbi Kolonimus, Kalman Shapiro, Shemin Kovdamov, who explained that Birkas Kohanim is a way of bringing the experience of Shavuos, of Har Sinai, into our personal lives. Rabbi Shapiro noted that at Har Sinai we were told, V'atem tiyuli mamleches kohanim b'goy kadosh, that each person must make himself into a holy individual, like a Kohen, by bringing Kedusha into every facet of his physical life. So too the Birkas Kohanim focuses on having bracha and Kedusha infuse one's physical life and possessions. Yivarechacha Hashem Yishmerecha, explains Rashi, is a reference to Shisparchu Nechasecha. One can add that this is also why the Gemara in Psachim says, Hakomodim Vatzeres Tebina Nami Lachem, that everyone agrees that part of rejoicing on Shavuos must be physical in nature, to show how the Kedusha of Torah permeates our physical lives. Rabbi Hoffman added to this thought his own insight, that this explains the connection between the Parsha of Nazir and the Birkas Kohanim, because the Nazir has refrained from certain physical pleasures, which according to certain authorities in the Gemara, like Bar Kapara, is viewed as an undesirable deprivation, perhaps only justified, in Rabbi Hoffman's words, as a corrective measure to correct an inclination towards forbidden pleasures. Hence the Ramah explains that when the Torah says Kadosh Yeh in connection with the Nazir, it means that he is holy, but only after he has completed his Nazirus period and he has regained a state of equilibrium with respect to the physical pleasures of this world. Rabbi Hoffman was somebody who believed strongly in achieving this sense of equilibrium. He lived his life striving for the perfect balance of kadosh yeh, both for himself and for others, and appropriately left us on the Shloshim observance day following Parshas Naso and the celebration of Shavuos with this down-to-earth message. We were exquisitely privileged to have this special neshama in our midst, who was down to earth, sent to us from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in order to teach all of us how to live our lives in Kedusha in a down-to-earth fashion. He will sorely be missed, but his teachings will live on forever. Yehi Zechro Baruch, Tehei Nishmaso Tzura B'Tzur HaChayim.
At this time, we call upon Rabbi Reichman, who obviously was in New York constantly and helped Josh out all the time. And I think he was the one who actually found a special type of prosthetic which enabled Josh to leave the nursing home and become independent again when Josh couldn't use the original type of prosthetic, amongst his many other things he did for Josh.
All the friends of Josh, tremendous words that we have, and I was thinking, saying this idea, we say every day the bracha of Abba, Aftanu, Shemitz Baruch loves us immensely, and then it moves over to the same that we bring Ubina Lahavin or Lahavkin Mishlam or the Rabbi. Hashem is Baruch give us the ability to study and to learn and to teach Torah. And I was wondering what that connection is between Ava Rabba, Hashem's great love for the Jewish people, and the ability for us to study Torah. But then I noted at the end of that prayer, saying that the Rebbeinu of the Lahaskell is Shmoyelu B'Ladu Rami, Ishma B'Lasu L'Kayim is told that they tell me to the Sefer Be'ahava. So it seems that the greatest Ahava, the Ahava Rabba, the most immense Ahava that Hashem has for us, is that He gives us the inspiration for us to learn Torah B'Ahava. In the Mayim, there's a Tanakh. There's a cause, there's a stimulus, and there's a response. If you give Ahava to somebody, if you shower love, the response will be love. Hashem Baruch, He showers His love upon us, so we respond with love. And the love that He gives us, the greatest Ahava that Hashem Baruch expresses Himself in it when He gave us this amazing and unique Torah, which is His most precious creation, and He gave it to us for Ahava. And we respond by learning and teaching and keeping the mitzvahs and the Torah of Ahava, with love. Josh is now the epitome of Ahava Torah. The epitome is absolutely no one I ever met had such tremendous Ahava like him. Young generation, of course, this great Rabbi, he was on Soloveichik and love. Sounds great love. That's amazing how it's such a love. And Josh, who was their student, also picked up this tremendous Torah. He was a great poet. Like a chance to learn people. I remember in Daf Yomi, when I would come by and said, Josh, when I had Daf Yomi, he was hooked up to so many tubes, couldn't talk, could only hear and watch, but he said he always would shake his head, yes, let's do the Daf. I came abroad, the terror abroad. And it was the Nisan we saw with him the last few weeks, that when he came back from 3 hard arrests and the doctors had given up and he came back to full consciousness, the last few weeks he was always guiding the network to teach Torah to people, work silence, drinking tubes, wires,
Rabbi Reiss, we're going to call back from another phone.
No, that's it.
It's hard to hear, okay? Ellie will call back.
Okay, yes, okay, keep going, thank you. Start from like 2 minutes ago, from 2 minutes ago.
They wrote the network, well, hooked up with wires and breathing tubes. This is all a function of this amazing habits of Torah, love of Torah, which was a response to the habits of Hashem, which Hashem himself showed to him. And the Am Yisrael are giving us this incredible gift of Torah. His attitude towards life was the Makabel Yisurim Ba'ava. He had many, many physical problems, especially the last month in the hospital. And it was always the simcha. He was always in a good mood. His Makabel Yisurim Ba'ava. And he had needs of anivus, not to seek the limelight, but to shy away from limelight, which was the great need of Moshe Rabbeinu, Yona Maariv. So it should be an incredible meditation for Am Yisrael, and an incredible inspiration, and an incredible coverage for Rabbi Mukbal Rabbi Soloveichik, who shaped him and guided him. Baruch,
Amen.
Amen.
this time we call on Rav Moshe Soloveichik, who was a Talmud along with Josh at University in Chicago, and known Josh for about 50 years, almost.
Much of what I wanted to say was already expressed by previous Maspidim. But I just want to say it over because it's Dvarim Hayotzim min Halev, and everybody is different, and perhaps the way we phrase it, each person will expresses different emotions. We knew Josh at different periods of time, and Josh had different relationships with different people. Now, my relationship with Josh goes back, I think, to his first year post-high school when he came to the Hebrew Theological College. And he was unusual in the sense there were others that would sit all the time in the Beis Medrash also. And Josh sat in the Beis Medrash all the time. But I remember in those days, his focus was on Chumash. He would sit and it seems that, of course, Josh became a walking library. I don't think that you could find a sefer that Josh didn't look through. But I think he had a special love. And when he would send out his papers, it had to do with the Seder of the week. And he would sit and you would know that if there was a Perish and Chumash, Josh knew it. This is when he was a young boy. He wasn't yet 20. It was his first year out of high school. I remember at that time, Rav Wernick, he was the mashgiach at the Hebrew Theological College. So every Sunday he would tell me to tell him over a thought on the Sedra that I thought of on Shabbos. And after I would tell it over to Rav Wernick, the first person I would go to was Josh. Because Josh's opinion and evaluation was very important, because he was the one that knew everything that was written on the Sedra. I remember sometimes he would tell me that's drush, and sometimes that was pshat. But he would give me an evaluation each time. But when I think back, and then of course, Josh first was in Hebrew Theological College. Ultimately, I think he was my father's shir there. Then he went to Eretz Yisrael, and he studied in Merkaz Harav. And then he came back, and he was my father's shir in Brisk, and for a short while, and then he was for a short while in Florida, and then he went to Yeshiva from Yitzchak Chana and Yeshiva University, and he had, in all these places, besides the learning, he had such a good relationship. I think Eli put it very well. He was everybody's brother. And I could suggest he was everybody's older brother. And more than that, everybody had immense respect for him. Those that learned, and very often in yeshivas you have boys that don't learn. And they usually have very little to do with the boys who are involved in learning. But even the boys who were not involved in learning, somehow they had high regard, they had respect, they had a relationship with Josh. And that had more to do with Josh than it had to do with them. When I was thinking, after Josh passed away, of a certain, because of Josh's special relationship with my father, I was reminded of a pshat that is brought down in the name of Rav Itzel of Volozhiner in the Hagos on the Nefesh HaChaim. So Rav Itzel mentions the Gemara that after Moshe Rabbeinu died and Yoshua became Moshe Rabbeinu's successor, so Pnei Moshe to Pnei Chama, Pnei Yoshua to Pnei Levana. The face of Moshe was like the face of the sun. The face of Yoshua was like the face of the moon. The moon is reflective light of the sun. And the Gemara says, Oy the Ziknei Hador, the elders of the generation said, Oy lo Shabusha, Oy lo Sechliba. Look, in a sense, it was a certain sense of embarrassment. And the Mefarshim explain it that the difference between Moshe and Yeshua was embarrassing. But Rav Itzel of Volozhiner says no. Rav Itzel of Volozhiner says the pshat was the other skenim of the generation, they were embarrassed that they weren't like Yehoshua. Why couldn't, to be like Moshe we couldn't be, but why couldn't we be like Yehoshua? And when I think about the relationship that Josh had with my father, Zatzal, I can say the same thing. Why couldn't we be like Josh? But I do have an answer to that question. When Rav Zalmala, the brother of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, he was probably the closest student of the Vilna Gaon. Once, when he fell asleep sitting next to the Vilna Gaon, and the Vilna Gaon held, his head was falling, so the Vilna Gaon held Rav Zalmala's head up. So the Vilna Gaon would say, I have Kol HaTorah Kula in my hand. That's how great, you remember, the Vilna Gaon said that. That's how great Rav Zalman was. And Rav Zalman died at an early age. And the maspid at Rav Zalman's Levaya was Reb Feivel, the Magid Meisharim of Vilna. And Reb Feivel was troubled about the Gemara in Brachas. The Gemara in Brachas says that Moshe Rabbeinu asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he was troubled, Tzadik v'Tovlo, Tzadik v'Ralo, Rasha v'Tovlo. How is it possible that we find righteous people who don't have it good, that suffer, that are sick, that are not able to have families? And on the other hand, we have Rishayim, wicked people, who seem that everything goes their way. And the Gemara says, you have a tzaddik gomer, you have a complete tzaddik, and you have a tzaddik she'eino gomer, a tzaddik that's not complete. And Reb Feivel was very troubled by the answer of the Gemara. He says, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that no one can understand. Ufanai lo yero. So what is the Gemara's answer? And Reb Feivel said that you have two types of tzaddikim. You have a tzaddik that's a tzaddik of the generation, that he was put in this generation, and those rules apply to a tzaddik that was in this generation. But he says you have someone that somehow seems to have been misplaced, that comes from another generation, from another era. And somehow he ended up in this time. And those we can't explain. Why it's tzaddik for Allah. Why is it tzaddik and he has it bad. And he mentioned the Gemara, as I heard from my father when he talked about Rav Zalmula. He says the Gemara at the end of brachas talks of the brachas that we make on various events when we see certain things. And one of them is zikin. And the Gemara asks, what is zikin? So the Gemara says it's like a shooting star. There's a machlokes whether it has reference to comets, as most seem to understand, or it has reference to meteorites. Machlokes Rashi and the Rambam. But Shmuel said about comets or about meteorites, whatever it is, seems more true about comets. Nirinli shevile dishmaya kishvil denardoi. Shmuel knew astronomical phenomena, understood astronomical phenomena very well. And he said, the pathways of the heavens are so clear to me, like the streets of Nahardar, which was the town that Shmuel lived in. But there is one astronomical phenomena whose path I don't understand. Levar Mikhofa Dishavit, the Lo Yadana Mahu, I don't know what it is, except for the comets, and I don't know what it is. And Reb Feivel said in B'derech Drush, he said, there are certain people, you have planets, and planets basically Lamarasayan. When we look, we see, we know their orbit, how they're going. But when you deal with comets, of course, science today has all kinds of understands perhaps how it goes. But Lamarasayan, a comet is something that just passes through. And most of the comets are outside the planets. It's in the solar system. But it comes from far away. It's not Lamarasayan on a set pattern that we see. And he says, regarding those souls, those nefashos, those people who come from far away that are not part of our generation, I can't explain. There's no way to explain tzaddik for Allah. If I was to think, and we have two types of tzaddikim. We have, and I will use the two brothers, Reb Chaim Volozhiner and Reb Zalmula, his brother Reb Zalman. Reb Chaim Volozhiner was the father of the yeshivas, of the yeshiva movement. There isn't a yeshiva today that doesn't have its foundation in the Volozhin yeshiva that was started by Reb Chaim Volozhiner. And then there was Reb Zalman. And Reb Zalman was so great in Torah. But Reb Zalman didn't have a yeshiva. It's not that he didn't have people that learned from him. People learned from him. Even the Vilna Gaon was influenced by Reb Zalman. Great people were influenced. But he didn't have that official position. He just sat and learned. It's very interesting. In this past week's Sedra we just read. So we talk about the Nesiim. So when it talks about the Nasi of Shevet Yehuda, it's Nachshon ben Aminadav. It doesn't even say Nasi. By the giving of the karbanos, the giving the sacrifices. Just Nachshon ben Aminadav. And then when it's then the Nasi of Shevet Shema, of Shevet Yisachar, So they mention first the name Surya and Surya Shaddai and whatever, and his name is mentioned first, and then Nasi Livnei Yisachar L'Shevet Yisachar, and then the others it mentions their title first, and then their names. What's the idea? There are certain people that they don't need titles, they don't need positions. It's just who they are, and the titles and the positions wouldn't add anything to them. Their greatness lies in who they are. That was not Ben Minadav. That was also later on when the Nesiim went to Meraglim was Kali ben Yefuna. The fact that the position of Nasi will be reduced in Eretz Yisrael, which led the other Meraglim to give a bad report, to lead a rebellion, the Nitziv says, didn't affect Kali ben Yefuna. Because Kali ben Yefuna, his importance, his shivas, had nothing to do with his position or who he was. And then you have people who position plays a role, but they give the position cover. When it comes to Torah, the Torah has to affect the position. Shevet Yisachar will lomdei Torah. But the other Shvatim were not identified with Torah as much. So when you deal in other areas, it starts off with the position and then the name of the person. Josh, on one hand, was like the Kali ben Yefuna, the Nachshon ben Aminadav. He didn't need to spread Torah. He was the Rav Zalmana of our generation. He was able to spread Torah without any position. But he had a special soul. There's nothing that we could do. He was from a different generation. We don't have Nachshon ben Aminadavs in our generation. We don't have Kali ben Yefunas in our generation. And it's interesting, when you deal with comets, so comets come from far away and they pass throughout the solar system. And I think this is where another area where Josh was unique. Josh was unique that wherever there was a shear, it made no difference, as one of the Maspidim said, whether the person who gave the shear knew more than him, and that was very difficult, or knew less than him. He went all over, and it was not easy for Josh to travel. He would go from shear to shear. And he would take notes. I remember he was once in the hotel over here. There was a simcha in the family. And I give a share in Chumash Sunday. And Josh, in his modesty, made a point of coming to my share. And it's very interesting. You know, there are hespedim being given. There are hespedim being given in a number of different places for Josh. Okay, we're not in New York. We're in Chicago. Why? Because Josh went everywhere to learn. He was like a comet that passed by every planet. In a sense, people who wouldn't go to want to be in the same place, Josh would go to them. And even the way he distributed his Torah was distributed. It wasn't that people came to him. He sent his Torah out. It's not that people didn't come to him. And wherever he was in the Beis Medrash, everybody would talk to him. Rabbi Reiss mentioned that Vishinantum levanecha, he mentioned about Moshe being the Rebbe of Aaron's, like the father of Aaron's sons. Vishinantum levanecha elu talmidecha. The Rebbe should be like a father. Someone called me up and he said he doesn't understand Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the Rebbe of all Klal Yisrael. What is the uniqueness about our own sons that we say that they were like his children? So apparently there are degrees. You can have a Rebbe, and he's not so much like the father. And you can have a Rebbe, and he's like the father. What is the difference between a Rebbe, between a father and a teacher? A father comes and he gives, a teacher comes, he gives his lecture, he teaches. If he's a very good teacher, the students focus on the lesson. But a father doesn't always give lectures. To the extent of his ability, he'll try to teach his son. You have to teach this, whatever it is. You give him skills. But the majority of learning that one makes from a father is through osmosis. I mentioned that when Moshe went up to Har Sinai, Torah says that Yehoshua accompanied him along the way up to whatever point. There's discussion up to where Yehoshua was able to go in Har Sinai. And Rashi says, Lo yadati ma tivel shel Yehoshua kan. What is the purpose? Why mention Yehoshua here? Moshe Rabbeinu went up. I think, and I mentioned it at my father's hesped. I said, Moshe, when he came down from Har Sinai, there were karnei or that came, light that emanated from his face. And when Moshe had to wear a veil because of this. But when he taught Torah, he raised the veil. What's the idea? The idea is, we have Torah Shebechsav, we have the written Torah, we have Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah. But more than all of that is the Torah that a person teaches by virtue of who he is. Moshe Rabbeinu, his Torah wasn't just what he wrote, it wasn't just what he taught, it was what he was, who he was. And Yehoshua was the successor. Yehoshua continued the Masorah. He had to give over the Torah of Moshe up to the point that he could go to Har Sinai. Even the impressions on Moshe Rabbeinu's face was Torah. So Yehoshua had to accompany Moshe. If I was to, and I said at that time that my father was that type of Rebbe, that type of teacher who taught not only Torah Shebechsav, Torah Shebal Peh, but even more important, he taught by virtue of who he was. And Josh Hoffman, Rabbi Yeshua Hoffman, he was the Yehoshua. He was the one that he received a lot from my father in whether it was the Hashkafa Shiurim, whether it was the Gemara Shiurim, whether it was the Shulchan Aruch Shiurim. But think about the Mesiras Nefesh for Torah. That didn't come. There was a certain rabbi in Israel who was a Talmud of my father, and he said to me, he would hear my father talk about Mesiras Nefesh for Torah, sacrifices for Torah. It was a share. But after my father's stroke, they saw it wasn't just a share. And Josh, I remember when in the hospital, when he would write about how he's using my father as his example, and his challenges were greater than my father's. But he was the one that really, in the Karnayor, the Torah personality, was something that he, perhaps more than anybody else, received from my father, that Mesiras Nefesh. And, the Medrash says that the Alshich says that when the Cain and Hevel brought the carbon, Kadosh Baruch Hu accepted the carbon of Hevel and rejected the carbon of Cain. What was the difference? The Hevel Hevi Gamhu Me'B'Choros Sona. Hevel brought himself together with his carbon. This is where Josh stands out above all of us. We learn, we do mitzvahs, but Josh, that was his whole being. Tihu chayechem vorech yameichem. At one point, Josh took everything in good humor. There was one point where he felt very frustrated. When was that point when he felt frustrated? It was before Purim. He was scared that he might not be able to hear Parsha Zachor, the Megillah, or something of that sort. And he said, Bol mayim ad nafesh. He lived to do mitzvahs. That was his whole life. He lost a leg. He had good humor. It's just questions. I remember calling him up then. Just questions about the kfura and for the leg, whatever it was. But the only point where he felt somewhat frustrated was, maybe I won't be able to do mitzvahs. That was his life. Tihu chayechem. We all talk about it, but he lived it. And B'Zir Anpin, in a small way, just as my father had an impact on him, his light should reflect upon us, and that we should become more dedicated to Torah and mitzvahs, and at the same time to have those special character traits of humility. He never tried to show off or anything. We have to be influenced by him, and if we'll do that, that will be the greatest ikaron we can have. He learned through osmosis, besides the teaching he did, and he taught through osmosis, and we have to take those traits and perhaps in a smaller way transmit the same thing, not just the Torah, but the osmosis learning as well.
Thank everyone. I was going to speak, but since it's very late, I just want to say Josh never just said over a board. Every week he always added something to it. So just on we know the drush of the Chazal that uvechol nafshecha afilu notalas nafshecha. With Josh, we were able to, just like Josh is very expansive, very broad thinking, allowed him to always give an extra insight into the parsha that to add on to what the commentators, whoever he was bringing down, said, an additional understanding of v'chol nafshecha afilu notalas nafshecha. It's not just in the situation, chas v'shalom, when a person is facing, that he has to be, he's in the face of chas v'shalom gil Reiss, shvichas damim, or avodah zarah, the mitzvah of giving up your life. But Josh, afilu notas nafshecha, it wasn't just like Rabbi Akiva. At the time when he was standing to get killed by the Romans, he was now able to fulfill this pasuk. But Josh lived at least the last 5.25, 5.5 years of his life, every second, Afilu notelas nafshecha. Kadosh Baruch Hu, he took his leg, then he took some toes on the other foot, then he took his kidneys, then he took basically the function of his heart, then he took a lot of the function of his eyes. It was very frustrating. At the end, he could only learn Torah with super bright lights, or often he would just have to call up to listen to Shiurim online, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu was notelas nafshecha for the last 5.25 years of his life, again and again and again. And Josh, unlike most people in the world, he was successfully resuscitated 4 times. Once at Columbia Presbyterian, the Hashem gave him his life back, and 3 times at Montefiore.
In the same day.
Within a few hours. And when there was the doctor said there was absolutely no hope, and he lived 7 weeks later and wrote multiple networks in the meantime. But the pshat of Filo Notelas Nafshecha was a very broad perspective of Filo Notelas Nafshecha. It's not just when Chas v'Shalom you're standing for Rabbi Kiva to be killed. Josh gave a new understanding of B'chol Nafshecha, Filo Notelas Nafshecha. Hashem took his life little by little, again and again and again. But Josh was very happy. Rabbi Kiva could only give his life once for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Josh was able to give his life many times for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is a lesson that we should all, hopefully we don't have to live it to the extent Josh had to live it, but we should be able to strive to love Hashem to the extent of V'chol Nafshecha. Just like Josh not only strived to that, he was able to actually live out V'chol Nafshecha, Filo Notelas Nafshecha. We want to thank everyone for all the speakers and everyone who joined us. I know he has some family here. We don't really know them that well, but we thank his family for able to join us. I know there's people on the internet, some of his family, and other people are watching on the internet. And Josh's legacy will be just like Josh. Over 19 years, never missed a net for it. No matter how sick he was, he would come off the respirator just in time, or wake up out of a coma just in time to write another Dvar Torah until the last 2 weeks of his life. There literally was. He lived with V'chol Nafshecha not till Hashem took his life, so he could live his life to give over to Torah. So we hope that we could just keep Josh as an ideal that hopefully we could strive to, and his memory should his Yizik Baruch, and it should be a Meilus Yosher for everyone who needs it. Thank you all for coming.
You should bench now.
Yeah. And at this time we will. We'll
Rabbi Reiss is
hand out
Italian.
benchers and.